I'm going. Good luck.
Hello, everybody. You're very welcome to this launch of two new poetry collections, Annie Deppe's Night Collage and Geraldine Mitchell's Mute Unmute. They're both published by Arlen House, and the poets will be giving a reading this evening and they'll be answering some questions. My name is Jane Clarke, and it's such a pleasure to introduce these poets and their work. Geraldine Mitchell is joining us from the south of France. Annie is in Renville in Connemara, and I'm in Glenmalure, County Wicklow. And it's really exciting to see that we're joined here tonight by viewers all over Ireland and all over the world, and quite a few in the States. So Annie's going to read first, followed by Geraldine, and then I'm going to ask some questions. But also, if you have any questions or any comments, please put them into the chat box, because we'd love to hear them, and I'd be happy to ask any of the questions you have. It's really important to say at this point that Nessa O'Mahony and Peter Salisbury are behind the scenes tonight, and this event wouldn't be possible without their tremendous help and guidance through the mysterious world of online events. So look, we're going to get started with Annie's beautiful new book, Night Collage. And I'll just tell you a little bit about Annie first. She was born in Hartford, Connecticut, and she's a dual citizen of Ireland and the States. This is her third collection. Her previous two collections were published by Summer Palace Press. Her work is widely published on both sides of the Atlantic. And her primary degree was a BA in English. She has an MA in educational psychology and an MA in creative writing from Lancaster University. She's received grants from the Arts Council of Ireland and the Northern Ireland Arts Council. And she was selected, like so many other significant poets, by Poetry Ireland for their Introductions reading series. She works for Stone Coast in Ireland, part of the University of South Maine's MFA programme. And she lives in beautiful Renville in Connemara, which she could almost wave across at Geraldine in Mayo in Lewisburg. So by way of introduction to Annie's book, which I'll show you again, this beautiful book, I wanted to quote Paula Meehan, who, as ever, says it so well when she praises Annie as a deft and determined witness to life's essential truths. And reading Night Collage, I was struck by the accumulated wisdom of a sensitive, reflective poet, which she combines with a dedicated openness and an acknowledgement of all of the not knowing. These are earthy poems of memory, of motherhood, of mortality. And they're poems of a long-lived love with a life partner. There are poems that explore the emigrant experience, that, you know, what it's like to make a new home far from where you've grown up, and to make a new home far from many people you love. Nestling Green is a very tender poem near the beginning of the collection, which talks about the wonder of making this new home. But then further on, there's a poem, I'm just going to find it here, Meditation Across Two Continents, that reflects on the complexity of home being thousands of miles from people you love. And I'd just like to read a few lines from that. It's not that I want to take the years and peel them back like the paper layers of a wasp's nest in winter, or reattach the strips of birch bark lost in banks of snow. So that's how she begins a poem, looking at that complexity. And but even in those lines that I've quoted there, you see the wonderful way she uses imagery. And, you know, these are images that linger, images that sustain and that change us because they change what we see and how we see it. You know, that one there, the reattach the strips of birch bark, they're just beautiful. I'm going to go just another poem with an example of the imagery I love. Oh yes, there's a poem, Staying with Mrs. West. And the first few lines I'll just read. Stooping through the little door of her chicken coop, the one with the gun nailed above the sill, we entered the gloom of cluck and murmur. Oh, I thought, what a wonderful way of describing the chicken coop, or the hen house as we would call it. She is a keen observer of nature, as is Geraldine, our second poem tonight. The two of them, between them, wonderful observation. I liked very much the first few lines of Traumgold, is a poem for Joan and Kate Newman, who I think are with us here tonight. So just I'll read a few lines. Fern banks rising like choruses, feathery fiddleheads edged with gold, as though thousands of notes were released from the embroidered bag. So then just moving on, in one of her poems, she has this line, I will try and find the right words to say what has never been said. And I read that line and I thought, she has done that. That is what she has done. The other thing I wanted to say is that she often lets the image do the work, which is wonderful. And just one more example of that, page 31 in this poem, Kreuzberg, The Intimacy of Strangers. On the bench beneath the linden tree, two Turkish women chat together unperturbed. Between them, an orange bag overflows with onions. So then, for me, that was a bit like William Carlos Williams, just between them. That's the last line of the poem, this orange bag that overflows with onions. I suppose what in the last poem, the final poem, Annie comes back to the theme of love and to the theme of mortality. And I'll just go to that poem now. The one about the boat. Wait a minute. The houseboat. Yes, there's a line she repeats in that poem. Once again, we will be wanderers. So that sense of the speaker and the partner, their openness to wherever they will wander. But the poem ends with a boat like a house whose name might well be gratitude. And it's so interesting that the collection ends with that word gratitude, because I suppose this is a collection of gratitude. It celebrates the vicissitudes of life, and in doing so, it gives thanks. So this is a collection to cherish, and my wish is that it'll reach the hands of those who will find there what they need to sustain them. So now I'd like to hand over to Annie for her reading. Thanks, Annie.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you so much. So many thank yous. That was a beautiful introduction. I need to also thank Alan Hayes and Arlen House for bringing out this collection. Geraldine, for asking me to share this launch with you. I'm very appreciative. Nessa and Peter for doing all the tech details that none of us understand but are absolutely necessary. A big thank you to my husband for just his unwavering faith in my work over the years. It's huge. And to my daughter, Caitlin, who painted this gorgeous cover. She's just fantastic. So I'm going to start with a poem that takes place in Western Massachusetts, where we lived before we moved to Ireland 21 years ago. We lived in Northampton, and it's part of an area that is a little bit tongue-in-cheek called the Happy Valley. It's not entirely tongue-in-cheek, but the valley, while wonderful with 5 different colleges and universities, all within about 10 miles of each other, and lots of cultural events. Also had a lot of social problems, a lot of drugs in the area. And I looked up online to see whether it's still referred to as the Happy Valley commonly, and found that since we left, there is now a cannabis dispensary business that calls itself the Happy Valley Dispensaries. So it's changed its feeling of the name even since then. But this was a little bit of our life before we moved to Ireland. It's called In Flew Chaos. It had been snowing for hours when the pounding began, thinking it one of my teenage children finally home on a Friday night, but without a key. I left my book to open the door, and into the kitchen's warmth flew chaos. A young woman shaking in a thin dress, snow-covered hair, and no shoes, arms flailing at something I could not see, screaming, and then the sudden silence as she yanked me down to a crouch. So he won't see us. What brings such disorder to mind now? On this morning's walk, we found the storm had rearranged the strand. A foot or more of sand was washed away, exposing jagged rock crops we hadn't known were there. On hands and knees, the girl and I watched from the hall window a slow, dark sedan slide by, snow falling in its headlights, her fingernails biting my arm, the quick, shh, he will kill me if he sees us. My husband was oblivious, doing something we called sleeping fast before driving unplowed roads over 2 states to reach his job. When I was a girl, a woman came waving a silver revolver at another back door, only glass between. My mother, who liked to read mysteries late into the night, let that stranger in and sat chatting with her at the kitchen table while I listened from another room. I kept trying to picture where the gun was. By the time my sons and daughters got home, the ambulance was gone. On the table by his bowl and morning cup, a note for my husband. And my mother and her woman with the gat, as it was handed down in family stories. What was I thinking? What was she? I always knew I would do anything to keep my family safe, but where had my good sense flown? Her pupils were dilated. As they lifted the stretcher, all I could do was give her hand a squeeze and tell her it would be all right. Damn it. Even as her body surrendered to the straps, I couldn't help being glad to see her go. But something wild had visited. Something had knocked at the storm door and been let in. This next poem, I was astonished when I realized that there's not a single line in it that remains from earlier versions. It's been revised enough that all the starting material was revised out, and it stands completely new creature. It takes its own journey here. It's called Outside Hoth. As the train passes what I call the Japanese house, clouds darken the bay, and I pull my thin coat tighter around my shoulders, the same coat I was wearing when arriving home from work I thought it too late to return my mother's call. She was dead by morning. I once read the story of a woman traveling through the mountains of Hokkaido and how she lost the child she carried within. A village doctor told her, our lives flow into us. So each of us starts out something of a water child, not yet solid or fully in this world until the age of 7. And how we begin to leave this life again and return to those waters at the age of 60. A gradual process, this turning of the tides, this slipping away. So short a time solid, so short a time fully in this world. Well, we've been living here on the Renville Peninsula now for 9 years. When we look out, we see islands and mountains, but the islands are, we've got Inishturk and Achill and Clare Island. And this poem starts here in this house with this view, and it travels back in time to Massachusetts to a time when I almost died from a burst appendix that went misdiagnosed. It's called I'm Not Seeing Bernini's Angels. We have lived in this cottage by the sea for 7 years, but now it's up for sale. A fresh coat of paint, red trim of windows, the sally tree where the wrens once sang removed. Still the swallows soar through rain. I'm having trouble getting an answer from my sister about how her medical tests went. Sorting through my desk this morning, I came upon a slip of paper. We become orphans together, our parents gone. In the city of life and death, 15 years back, they slid me into the round opening of a machine that hummed. They told me not to move. Afterwards, no one would look me in the eye, and I was left alone in a wheelchair, waiting for an orderly, everyone's paths parting around me like water. I understood. The news must be bad. 2 days after surgery, my sister sat at my side while my husband and daughter left to see Bernini's work at the Fogg Museum. Their favorite part, the 500-year-old pinched terracotta sketches of angels. One with its drapery blown open, furled back over a leg as though by a gust of wind. In the show's catalog, I know this can't be true, but we're dealing here with angels. X-rays appear to reveal surprising hollows of light within those seraphim, like the invisible tattoos of last rites I will carry till I die. We arrived home from the hospital to find the power out, snow falling on an owl on the barn's steep roof, and my body radically changed. None of that mattered. I know someday we must all move on from these glorious homes, but for a while longer, we get to linger. I hope my sister's news will be good. And it was. Unlike the outside Hoth, where every line had changed, this poem I love to read because it arrived, it's like a gift poem. It just arrived with its own story, its own rhythm, its own life, its energy. And it's just, because of that, I just love reading it because it felt like a gift. It's called The Singing House. That autumn in Tully Cross, the months slipping from green to tan, the presence of George Herbert keeping me company beside Derry Herbert's rising hill. There were times when I sat at the table alone, no one else at home, and an indistinct melody line would lift from somewhere within the house, then blossom into multi-part harmonies of humming or vibrating string song. And I wondered whether this drifting gift, sometimes from the side and at others from behind my skull, was part star song or brainstorm or messages from beyond or appliance or entirely imagined. My husband never heard it. We didn't live there long. Several years later, a few townlands away, I read about an operation on a young man with a tumor in his skull who loves music, whose life is music, and how his doctor mapped his brain through MRI, then prodded to try and find where and how his doctor mapped his brain through MRI, then prodded to try and find where his gift dwells. The doctor's goal, to spare that sacred place within. Midway through the operation, still awake, tethered to machines, brain exposed, he was handed his saxophone, golden and glowing, and told to blow. It's as though our souls work from the inside out to form a chord of rhythms and vibrations to manifest a place of harmony. I'd like to think the surgeon went home and heard a night chorus from his refrigerator or wherever such melodies come from. Music rising within four walls as outside the wind backs in from the west. And to close this section out, I'm going to read a poem that has its sort of a nighttime logic. Again, it's situated here in this house, and it was written after the death of a friend named Sky Garner. Some of you will know her. It's called Night Collage 7. I could sit Shiva for Sky if I lived nearer her loved ones. Instead, I pull up a stool and listen to the night, seek out the lights on Clare Island until low clouds move in and seem to snuff them. And I think how in Cold War Berlin, they planned to turn down the air in the fallout shelters so no one would have the oxygen to rebel. Closer to home, our neighbor is hurrying along the sea lane through the dark. What is needed in the barn this late? Imagine, not enough oxygen. But that's the problem, we can't imagine. People have returned to the house up the hill and every window is ablaze. Together they make a city, a miniature Jerusalem. After the winter storm departed, we found the gunwale of a wooden boat washed up in our garden, and from somewhere decades ago, my mother's voice reciting, "Where did you come from, baby dear? Out of the everywhere, into the here." I miss my friend who once lived in the heart of Venice. Salve, Sky, salve. Who knows where all this ends up, all those watery stars? If I knew how, I'd pull up this island like a low chair and listen for you, or rebuild that boat and row. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annie. That was just beautiful, really beautiful.
Thank you, Jane.
And it was wonderful for me to hear your poems, having been reading them over the last week or so and sort of living with the collection, and just wonderful to hear you read them yourself. So now we are going to hear Geraldine's poems. So I'm going to start by introducing Geraldine and by saying a few words about her collection. Geraldine Mitchell was born in Dublin, but has been living in Mayo for over 20 years. She lives close to the town of Louisburg in a rather beautiful spot very near the sea. She has a degree in English and French and a master's in English literature. She has written novels for young people, a biography of Muriel Gahan, and this is her fourth poetry collection. All her collections are published by Arlen House. Among her awards and accolades is the 2008 Patrick Kavanagh Award. Like each of Geraldine's previous books, this book, Mute on Mute, is an intensely moving collection of beautifully crafted poems. I would say it contains multitudes, but for tonight, I'm going to highlight two particular themes in it. And the first is the question that we all face at this moment in the Earth's history. How do we respond to the environmental catastrophe we're bequeathing to the next generations? And Geraldine does what, you have to excuse me, I'm quoting Paula Meehan again, but this is a quote I love and I find good guidance myself. In an ironic and strange way, the artist can sometimes be more powerful as an activist by following the muse. And I know that Geraldine has a history of activism as a community worker and as a human rights campaigner. And here she puts that activism, it's her muse that does the work here. From the very first line of the first poem, which is a very delicate poem called Test, which I think Geraldine's going to read for us. And the line is, "Tell me what you know about dandelion." She continues with poems that do not shirk the devastation. A poem like "This Was Not the Deal," a poem like "Late Trees," a poem like "On the Length of the Day or the Night." She raises the alarm for the planet. She mourns. She reminds us of what we love, which is a very important part of making it matter to us. She shows us what we lose, and she hurts us into paying attention. But also, I was thinking of the people who work day in, day out campaigning about climate catastrophe, whether that's Oisin Coughlin and Friends for the Earth, or whether it's Greta Thunberg, the need for hope. They all say we need hope and we have to instill hope. And Geraldine does that, particularly in the third section of the book. She gives us, a poem like "Darkness cannot drive out darkness," where she quotes Martin Luther King, a wonderful poem. And in the last four poems of the collection, she gives us hope. Now, it's not naive hope, it's a hard-won, persistent hope. And the other theme, I'll move to the other theme because Geraldine is going to be reading some of the poems that are referred to there. But the other theme that I want that's very striking in this collection is, as the title indicates, silence. And she meditates on what can be said, what cannot be said, what hasn't been said. And in January, she wrote a wonderful article for the Irish Times about the writing of this collection. And if you haven't read it, I'd highly recommend it. So the silence it's about the silence that she and her husband found when they moved to Mayo, which she calls the silence of peace, a peace there, but also the silence that grew as her husband became iller with dementia, the subsequent silence of mourning. And silence is something we all need, we all fear, and so that's part of the relevance of this collection of these poems. But at the heart of the collection, which Geraldine is going to read from, there's this sequence, Such Silence She Fell Into, and that's where Geraldine reimagines the life of her great aunt, whose very existence had been silenced. So that particular sequence it's very powerful, and it comes out of well, to my mind, a feminist perspective, but again, it's the lyrical poet who recreates and honors this forgotten, silenced aunt. I'm just going to quote what Geraldine put in that article. To remember is to break the silence. Remembering is an act of refusal. It blocks silence's attempt to obliterate the past. But finally, I do want to pick out a poem towards the end, page 80. It's Short Nights, Choppy Seas, dedicated to the poet Jean Toomey. And it really is a poem for our particular moment now, because it really refers to our tentative opening up after the time of having to move inward and being so careful, and how we are now struggling with, well, how safe is it to be open again, and struggling with our need to touch and our fear of it. And so I just thought, Geraldine, I think, grasps this moment beautifully. So I just read the last few lines from this poem. How all through long weeks and months we did without, how when we thought it safe again, we reached out cautious hands, slowly opened famished arms, half fearful of the pent-up charge. So with that, I would like to hand over to Geraldine and ask her to read a selection of her wonderful poetry. Thanks, Geraldine.
Thank you, Jane, so much. I'm overwhelmed by your introduction. You are very generous, and it's just lovely to hear you talk about my work. I really feel tonight among friends, because I am among friends. Jane is a friend, Nessa and Peter, who are keeping us going, are good friends, and Annie and her husband Ted are also very good friends and very treasured friends. Thank you all for making this happen, allowing this to happen. And I have to say a big thank you as well to Arlen Hayes of Arlen House, who has published both Annie and myself, and to everyone out there, the people we can't see. Test. Tell me what you know about the dandelion. Tell me what you know about the bee. Tell me what you know about the sun, moon, and stars, and the sea's tasseled blanket, the fish that swim through it, its weave. Tell me what you know about the open coast, the swallowing brine brimming its rocky shore, the bird's rich textured concert, all feather and beak and itching parasites. Tell me what you know about the circulation of the blood, how as you lie on the grassy crust of a windy cliff, you trust your heart will thump you into another day. Tell me what you know. There's a poem that when we were putting together the manuscript with Alan, I was very attached to, but it didn't fit in the book simply because it's the wrong shape. So we came to the solution of putting it on the back cover, and that's the next poem I'm going to read. And while I have the book up, I'd just like to say that this painting is by the wonderful Westport artist, Mags Duffy, and I'm really happy to have it on the cover of Mute on Mute. To tell truth from lies, the wood from the trees, the colour of cats in the dark, a speckled thrush in a moonlit bush, the moon itself, precious as prayer mouthed on the cusp of dawn, Know how to pitch your voice, not too high, not too low, until truth as you see it flows straight from the heart, tempers the fear that you feel now that the floorboards have rotted, the rug is pulled from under your feet, and what you glimpse through the cracks has you envy the robin, its innocent breast, the way trees tremble or hold still, the elegance of flowers you used to call weeds and then kill. You hear a ruffle of doves, breath off the sea as it sighs onto shore, and suddenly you're awake to a truth that you have known all the time, and you chase the long night that sweeps down from the future on wings. Alarm, a faint whistle, a silver whisper, a secret shared in the night. I saw snow, white sheets stretched under sentinel trees, the moon above, a faint breeze in high branches. When the whistle grew to a whine, I turned in the bed, buried my head under pillows. I watched wolves stalk in single file, their paw prints even as holes in a flute, each rough pelted creature making a little leap as it drew its paws up out of the depth of the snow. With each leap, a sudden shriek, shriller, louder now, loud enough to cause me to sit up, stare into the dark, hear the scarlet wail, smell smoke. What were her parents thinking when they called her Cass? It comes most nights now, the dream she can't get rid of. It goes like this. The staircase to the basement opens like an aching throat. Air shunts her face and neck. She tests her footing, falls, tumbles through horse shadows. Her pupils pool, ears stretch to gauge the silence. Nothing. Only darkness, louder than sound, time slowed to no time. She's paused between two worlds. She waits to surface, the way you wait in supermarket car parks with a lift, the way you wait for a parent to remember you. And that's not all. Last night it changed. It was as if she'd hit a switch and rows of neon strip lights burst the silence, flickered into dazzle, lit her with the cruel fluorescence of a killing place. She stood in the abandoned abattoir, steel hooks idle, the tiles bright white. Somewhere water ran, a clock began to tick. Her world had flipped to future tense, the hooks began to sway, the rhythm tachycardiac. And then the sudden cranking of a vast machine, a slow, robotic creature waking up. Tonight, she will not close her eyes. Instead, she'll walk the wood behind the house. She'll watch the sky drop stars through naked branches, say a prayer. The collection is, it's in 3 sections. The first and third sections are both called Pour Out the Dark. And as Jane said, it is a collection full of darkness, but it's also, there's an attempt, especially in the third section, to pour out that dark, to find a glimmer of light and hope. But the middle section, which I like to think of as the heart of the book, is called Such Silence She Fell Into. And it's a remembrance of my great aunt Geraldine Kirby, whose name I was given, and who had a tragic life. Her mother died in childbirth, giving birth to her, and she took her own life in 1930 at the age of 48. So it's an evocation. It's an attempt to bring her back, if not to life, then at least back into memory. So I'm going to read, it's a sequence of 19 short poems. I'm just going to read a selection. Because wind, because rain, because skin over bone, because night worn thin, because web, because fabric, because blanket, because patchwork quilt, because stitch, 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 because love, because story, because linked arms, stout legs, because holding, because held, because graveyards so full, because with us forever, because we will not forget, because human bridge, because love, because story. As if time was distance, I see you drift out to sea on an absence of years. As if distance was time, I measure the years that separate your life from mine. As if time and distance did not exist, I imagine us sitting in silence, side by side. Old stories sift and stir, riddled by the unexpected whispering of voices, settle into hollows under ash. A door without keyhole or handle, hinged to the entrance of her heart. A twist of rope, rough wisps visible against the fading light. No one walks this way for fear of hidden roots, of sleeping curs roused to frenzied barks. A spider spins its web between the bell pull and the weathered door. It sits and waits. It watches. It has time. Far out on night's ocean, she feels the surge of the sea, the bang and slap of the keel in the trough of a wave, feels the sting of salt as it lashes her face. But her eyes are sealed tight with the scales of the hundreds of fish she has gutted, a mean little knife still gripped in her hand. She arches her back, strains to break loose of the diesel stench, swim to calm waters, wake. How busy the birds are, the still morning air thickened with wings. The jackdaws scrambling, louder than ever, heavy black petticoat flaps. What is the meaning of this invasion? These scissors that stab, these rapiers drawn. Her silence unnerves her, ripped up and shredded. It flies like ticker tape, falls like litter. No one to talk to, not even herself. She holds her breath, listens closely, prepares to dive into the narrow space where noise is not, the rift in time that opens instants before a concert starts, the hidden place where silence is distilled. This is a moment of neither then nor now, when forest leaves hang dumb, birds sleep, heads tucked beneath their wings, their feathers settled smoothly, layer on layer. This is where she would make her home, in a silence sleek as silk, limpid as truth, or the absence of pain. If she gets her timing right, she'll plunge in, vanish into that brief lull, those few mute moments. I'm going to finish now this section with something with some light in it. I'm aware that there is darkness, but there's darkness in the world we're living in. But I would just like to read one last poem, and it's called St. Bridget Dreams of the Arrival of Spring. Deep in her skull, a bud is forming. A bird has nested in her wasted chest. Small twigs tickle, eggs speckle the moss. She says these things, says she sees them in the curtained dark. Deep in her nest, a flower may open, a tulip black as the years been long. She says it's hiding its yellow tongue, biding its time to part its petals, surprise the brightening womb with light, pour out the dark. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Geraldine. That was really beautiful. And it was lovely that you were able to read, a number of poems from the sequence, Such Silence She Fell Into, as well as the other poems on either side of that. Really great. And it's just a privilege to hear both of you read so beautifully from your collections. And there's something about the attention of the online launch that is different, that allows, there's something we lose in it, but there's something about this concentrated attention we have for the words that is wonderful. So I am going to ask one or two questions. We'll see how our time is going. And Nessa is going to let me know if there's any questions from the audience. I don't think there are any yet, but if there are any, Nessa will let me know. And I also just wanted to say, I know that we have over 100 in the audience. And as Geraldine says, we are among friends, and it's wonderful to know you're all out there. Can't see you, but it gives us a kind of a feeling of warmth and companionship knowing you're there. So the first question I just wanted to ask each of the poets, and I'm going to start with Annie, is a question that I thought everybody, having heard your work, would be interested in hearing a bit about, is just about the process of writing the collection. What was that like for you, Annie? Over how long was this happening? Anything at all about the process, please?
Thank you, Jane. Well, interestingly enough, maybe I should say ironically enough, one of the great pleasures of this pandemic for me was the gift of time. And as a writer, we all know that time is golden. Mm-hmm. We were in Northern California visiting for our granddaughter's 7th birthday last spring when the pandemic blew up, and we spent the next 15 months unexpectedly in Northern California. So there we were, out for walks a little bit, but mostly in the house, at the table, going through with the opportunity to revisit and revise poems that had been building for quite a number of years. My second collection came out in 2009. And wasn't in a hurry. I felt like I said everything by the time I'd finished the second book. But in the last few years, I had begun having a focus of wanting to be in conversation in a way with my adult children. As I was writing, I was very conscious of wanting to let them know who I am and what my concerns as a citizen of the world, as a human being, what they are. When I went to put the poems together, in printing them out, I realized there really are enough, but there's some poems missing. They're ones that haven't quite gotten finished, that they're close, that I didn't know how they were going to finish, or ones that I'd had images for years that I knew this book was not completed until I'd written those poems, and this was the time to do that. And those came together over the summer. The first poem that I read, it was always going to be the first poem. The last poem I read, well, not the last poem I read, but the poem that I thought was going to be the last poem in the collection. As I wrote those missing poems, it kept getting moved back a little bit. So there was first one last poem, and then suddenly the next poem became the last poem. And then again, it was like the waves coming in. It was like a symphony trying to finish where you think you're at the end, but here comes another one. So all I know is that when I reached the end, And as you pointed out in your introduction, the last word was gratitude. It just, I am grateful from the bottom of my heart to have this book come out. There were times when I wondered if I'd ever get a third book. So this is a joyful evening.
Oh, that's wonderful, Annie, and lovely to hear about the process, and lovely to hear that the time in lockdown was a creative time for you, and you know, that was surprising and you know, wonderful for you. So that's really good. The other thing, when you spoke about, you know, telling your adult children, what came to my mind is the collection almost as a letter to your adult children. That's just the image it, you know, brought to my mind. And then I thought, how appropriate that the painting is by your daughter. You know, that's just wonderful. And then the other thing, I love the way you use the waves coming, you know, and thinking of you living in Renville and the waves all around you there, close to the doorstep. So I thought, I love the image. But anyway, that's really lovely to hear all of that, Annie. I'm just going to ask Geraldine the same question. What was your process, Geraldine, for this book?
Well, first thing I would say was that it was very different from the first three collections, and it was very enjoyable. It was very, very satisfying process. And it's interesting that Annie mentions that time we got last year, because I had enough. I knew I had enough. Was accumulating enough poems for a new collection, as one does. You think you haven't anything, and then you have a pile. But there were the dark themes, and there was the silence, because I'm a bit obsessed with silence. So there's enough for the collection, but it wasn't quite there. And then the lockdown happened, and we were suddenly given this edgeless time. I have that phrase in one of my poems, because it was like stopped time. And with that, I wrote some more poems, but it then was as if I gave more time to looking at the poems. I have two people I go to who I trust, and we share work and are very frank with each other, and some other very, very generous readers who will read my work. But I had this time, and then it was as if the poems started talking to each other. There was this conversation started up, and for perhaps the first time, and it took me 4 collections, I got really ruthless about ditching poems that didn't fit. I mean, if I felt they weren't quite right, because this shape was happening, I just, you know, chucked them overboard. And I have to thank also for the 3 parts. I have to say it now, because we are among friends. It was Ted Deppe who suggested to me that I might make three sections with my silence sequence in the middle, and I think that was a brilliant suggestion. But then the other really important thing in the process was an event in 2019 on the 30th of March, which is the birth of my first granddaughter. Yeah. And I tell you, there's nothing like a new life coming into this world of ours to focus the mind. And I've dedicated the book to her, because so then it sort of became for me almost like poetry of witness, so that it will be taken into the future without sounding too grandiose, but I wanted to make that link with her, and finally the title just arrived at the very last minute, and I don't know where it came from, but I'm very happy with it.
That's again, thanks very much, Geraldine. I love what you're saying about poetry of witness, and it is indeed poetry of witness. And again, what a gift to your granddaughter. And you know, you can imagine her having that in the years to come. And it is a remarkable gift to her as well as to all of us. Again, it's interesting that both of you are talking about creativity through that very difficult time, and having the invaluable time for making that we need. And again, I love, Geraldine, what you said about how the poems start to talk to each other, and that's the magic of poetry, and you can see that in the way you've put the collection together. Now, I'm just going to check. We don't have any questions from the audience. So I wonder, could I just ask you one more brief question each? And I think then we will have time for a poem each. If that's all right, will we go for one more question each? Annie, would I just ask you a little bit about that theme that seemed very strong to me about being an immigrant and sometimes your heart being torn between this country and that country? Just a little bit about that, maybe.
Yeah. You know, I mean, you mentioned that we're dual citizens, and I'm lucky to have had grandparents born in Ireland, so it makes it much easier to be here. But we came when we were 50. Our kids were grown. We were ready for an adventure. And we came for a year. We rented the southernmost house in Ireland on Cape Clear Island, and it changed everything for us. There are gifts from both countries. The gift in America is family. And if you push me too hard right now, I'll burst into tears because that's the hard part of being here. It's the hardest part.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, America had the stability. We had a house there. We had roots. We knew who we were in relationship to having grown up there. But coming to Ireland, it gave us a kind of a freedom to explore life, to push on it a little bit, to follow, you know, as Joseph Campbell's "Follow Your Bliss." It sounds so corny, but oh gosh, is that important to follow what you love, to take the risk, and so that's what we did. It gave us the opportunity not only to live on Cape Clear, but in Donegal, in Galway, even in Berlin for a little while, and then come here to Connemara, where, as I say, we've had the gift of stability for 9 years. Love Ireland, love the United States. Ireland is close enough that it's not culturally, that it's not this big shock to the system coming here. You're not having to spend every moment trying to figure out how something works. That came in Berlin a little more with the language, but here it feels familiar, and yet it's different. You've got different plants, you got different birds, the language sounds familiar, but you can get in big trouble really fast if you assume that you know exactly what you're saying with the given word, because it has some variety there. And a lot of the poems, as you say, they come from the tension between what is this home versus the road, home versus the road. And we've been here long enough now that Ireland feels like it's both home and the journey. So it's pretty amazing that way. We wake up, you know, every morning feeling grateful and just doubly blessed with our life.
Okay, thanks very much, Annie. I mean, I suppose I just want to add that you and Ted have brought a lot to Ireland, and you've brought a lot to the poetic world in Ireland as well, because I'd heard about you before I met you, you know, along the way, and I met you at one of the first readings I was at the Stinging Fly in Dublin about 2011, I think. But anyway, so you have brought a lot too. So we're lucky that you've moved here. But and the last thing I want to say is that theme, I think, is a theme for many people who live away from the place where they were born, and that tie, you know, that bond that is important and can hurt when you're away from it. But anyway, so Geraldine, just the one question I wanted to ask you, one of many questions I could ask you about the collection, but the question I was thinking about again was just about that sequence, Such Silence She Fell Into, and about the writing of it. And it seems to me to be a huge, a profound empathy must have informed it for you to be able to create these poems. And I just wanted to ask you a bit about that, to tell me a bit more about that.
Well, I think the profound empathy is that I always knew, or from, I don't know what age I was told, but I sort of always carried within me the fact that I was Geraldine because of Geraldine Kirby, the great aunt. So that's one thing. And then I had this obsession with silence, or perhaps I worked it out of my system now. And I was working on a sequence. I wanted to write a sequence about silence, but there was no focus. And but she was in it. There was a poem, she was already in one of the longer poem in that sequence. And then I discovered that although I knew why I was called Geraldine, and I knew stuff about her life because another aunt, my father's sister, had told me, she'd gone out of it, she wanted me to know. I knew about her suicide, I knew about the day that my aunt, when she was 15, was told about her aunt having killed herself and so on. So I knew a lot, but I discovered that nobody else in the family, not only did they not know why I was called Geraldine, they actually didn't know this woman had existed. And I thought was just staggering. So, and that was what gave the emotion and the focus to that sequence, which was a powerful experience for me to write. I mean, I was thinking about it again today. It really was powerful, as you were, very emotional, very moving. So, and then the whole thing of memory is so, you quoted, that thing about, silence, breaking the silence by recovering memory. And I came across that I just want to place this quote because I just love it, from Bill McKibben, the American environmental writer. I just found it somewhere by chance. The loss of memory will be the eternal loss of meaning. And I find that really, really potent. So I think I said it when I was reading the poem. What I've tried to do is, you can't bring anyone back to life, but you can bring them back into memory. And I hope that's what I managed to do.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much, Geraldine. It's a marvelous work of honoring what you've done there. And I think it's interesting for other poets, myself and other poets, to hear how that came about, and to hear that that's possible. And this is how we learn from each other, as well as enjoying your work. It provides inspiration for all of us. Okay, we're just 2 minutes past 8, but I think I will just ask you each just one last poem each, and then I'll say the final thank yous and close. So we have time for just one last poem. This time I'll ask Geraldine to go first. Is that all right?
Okay.
And then I'll
Well, I am really delighted that this time I was kind of watching the clock and I'm not going to have time to read a final poem, because I have been, for the last 5 months, I'm at my daughter's in France, and she has put me up and she's put up with me. And so I very much want to read a poem which I wrote here in where she lives a couple of years ago, when she was flying back from, she'd been out to Reunion Island in the Indian Ocean where she worked long ago, and she was flying back, and I was anxious, as one is when a loved one is up in the sky. So I read, as my daughter flies north, I examine my fear, for Lisa. All night I cup you in my feathered hands, and picture in the studded sky a silver bird, cold carcass, you slumbering in the hum, the cool penumbra, hushed comfort of the steward's slender palms. This morning, as I lean into the wind, a kestrel rides a fold of pillowed air, buoyed up by nothing but its own intent, its feathers spread to steer and hold, trust the instinct it was born with. 6 hoopers suddenly above me, a honking contrail quaffing sun, wings in steady semaphore to the unfledged world. They land on liquid runways, knead the water, glide to silken stops. Trust us, they seem to say. Your stiff-winged bird will make soft landing. We taught you all you know of flight.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Geraldine. And one last poem from Annie.
Okay, I grew up with a mother who told us nothing about her childhood. My siblings and I arrived at adulthood with maybe 5 facts, maybe 3 facts we knew about her growing up. After she died, however, we found, my sister and I found a letter in a trunk in the attic that my grandfather had written his then college-age daughter, and that plays into this. It's where family history and the public world intersect in fire after the Iroquois theater burned in Chicago. in 1903. It's a state-of-the-art, beautiful new theater, but it wasn't quite finished. The safety features weren't all in line. And after this fire, the laws were changed. Doors were required to open outwards rather than inwards so that people could escape. But by that point, it was too late for my grandfather's first wife and his 12-year-old son, and they perished during a Christmas week matinee. This is called Grandfather Fire. This could be a poem about doors that only open inwards, 10-foot-high piles of bodies crushed against them. A woman who wasn't my grandmother and her son who was never an uncle. The glorious woodwork, the long velvet curtains, the laws now requiring doors to open out. Birdie, Taylor, part of my mother's prehistory she tried to bury. And her father, Jack Dryden, I never knew they called you Jack, who made and lost a fortune or three, a family or two. Jack, who after the crash ended alcoholic in a New York City room designed like a boat, ship shape, everything pared to the bone like a survival craft, though you didn't survive. Fire, water, the dirt of Potter's Field. How could you bear to breathe the air of that saloon turned morgue? In its charred chaos, only a custom engraved Christmas watch. Only a pair of gold fluted earrings.
Thank you very much, Annie. And thank you, Geraldine, as well. I'm really glad we did take the time for those two very moving poems. So thank you very much. So it's only remains to me to draw the evening to a close. I do want to thank Geraldine and Annie again for their wonderful readings and for the openness in which they discuss their work, which is wonderful for all of us. I want to thank, of course, Arlen House, who produces such beautiful books. Peter and Nessa, you two, it really would not have been possible without you. Your generosity, your steadiness, and you're both such creative people, and thank you very, very much. And then last but not least, you, the audience, who have made the night so special and so meaningful, because we need audiences, as you all well know. And it's such an important part of our art form. Our art form is about that relationship. It's essential to us, and it's essential to us to get heard. So thanks very much, everybody who's joined us tonight. And I wish you lots of poetry over the next few months, and lots of sunshine, hopefully, here in Ireland. So goodbye from Flemalure, France, and Renville. Bye.